William Walker Atkinson's The Mystery of Sex, or Sex Polarity. Chapter 2 was The Law of Love. This is Chapter 3, The Evolution of Sex. It was at one time believed by many, in fact by all persons, that some of the lower forms of life originated spontaneously. That is, without being reproduced from some parental life form. It was thought that frogs and other reptiles, worms and small insects, and other lowly forms of life originated from the dust of the earth or the slime of the riverbed. But science has brushed aside all such erroneous ideas into the great dustbin of discarded theories, and has firmly established the doctrine that all life proceeds from life. Reproduction is universal among the living forms, and reproduction always presupposes the manifestation of sex, in at least an elementary degree. The lowest forms of life are found in the slime of the ocean bed, and these elementary forms are but little more than drops of gelatinous glue, without apparent or perceptible organs, but yet manifesting the activities of life in nutrition, assimilation, elimination, and reproduction. And science will later on discover the presence of sex in even these primitive forms to account for the processes of reproduction, which will be in accord with the old occult teachings on the subject. The simplest form of reproduction is that of some of these lowly forms of life, which consists simply of division. The minute cell grows to a certain size, and then begins to separate in itself into two cells. For a short time, these two cells are connected by a minute filament, causing them to resemble a miniature dumbbell. Then the filament breaks, and the two single-cell creatures become separate individuals. Later on, each one of these cells divides itself into another pair, and so on, generation after generation. Science, so far, has not discovered evidence of sex activities in this process of reproduction, but reasoning by analogy, it may be seen that the old occult teaching is correct, and that before this division or separation can take place, there must be a process of fertilization of one cell by another, at certain periods, the effect of which is continued through several generations of cells. And it has been noted that if the cells are kept apart from foreign cells, the process of separation ceases after a certain number of generations, and the particular branch becomes extinct, so that it's reasonable to suppose that the generative and reproductive function must be stimulated from time to time by sexual action and fertilization. A step higher in the scale is that of the protozoan, which also reproduces itself by subdivision. But before this subdivision takes place, there occurs a union of two separate cells in what is called conjugation, after which the process of separation or subdivision begins. But instead of merely two separate cells forming from the original cell, the young cells there appears a subdivision into many cells, the young cells appearing as buds upon the combined parent cells, similar in appearance to the buds of the plant. These buds afterward drop off and pursue their mature individual life, afterward combining each with another cell, and then reproducing as did their parents. It is not held that the two uniting cells are distinctively male or female, but that they possess the quality of dual sexuality, as do some animals much higher in the scale. When the union takes place, the male element of each fertilizes the female element of the other, and the reproduction follows thereupon. Moppes says, the para or micronucleus is a hermaphrodite sexual element of sole importance in conjugation. The stages of the process are as follows. 1. The micronucleus increases in size. 2. division occurs until there are 8 micronuclei. 3 of these 8, 7 disappear. 4, the remaining 1 divides again, differentiating a male and female pronucleus. 5. In the next stage, the male elements of the 2 individuals are exchanged, and the new male nucleus fuses with the original female portion. 7. Finally, the individuals, separating from one another, reassume all their original organization before beginning again to divide in the usual fashion. Geddes says, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 spores of lowly algae club together, as if to gather sufficient momentum to make a combined start in life. The young forms of the sun animalcule usually unite in 2s, but Gabriel has observed in some cases a multiple union. In another sun animalcule, 2 to 30 individuals may unite loosely in what is called a plastogamy, but close union of nuclei occurs only between 2 individuals. So in gregarines, while the usual union is certainly dual, Gruber has observed what may be called multiple conjugation. Conjugation of 2 similar unicellular organisms occurs, as we have seen, very generally in the protozoa, and is also a common fact in the life history of simple algae. Opposite cells of adjacent filaments are attracted to one another, and the contents of one cell pass bodily over into the other. In the great majority of cases where conjugation occurs, the uniting cells are to all appearances similar, but it must be remembered that it does not follow from this that they are physiologically alike. In fertilization among higher plants and animals, the 2 elements which unite are highly differentiated, alike in contrast to one another and in opposition to the general cells of the body. A consideration of the phenomena in loose protist colonies, which suggest a bridge between unicellular and multicellular organisms, shows how gradually this latter contrast also may have been brought about. As the scale of life ascends, under the impulse of the evolutionary urge, the life forms begin to develop organs by means of which the sexual activities may be better performed. In some cases, the individuals are sharply separated into male and female in their sexual functionings, although preserving their similar outward appearance, while in others, each individual possesses the organs of both sexes, this state being styled hermaphroditism. This state is quite common among some of the lower forms of living things. The oyster, other shellfish, the barnacles and allied forms, the tapeworm, the earthworm, and even the members of the snail family, are hermaphroditic. Among some of the higher forms of life, even occasionally in man, this condition is manifested as a reversion or abnormal condition. But in many of the lower forms, this condition is the natural and normal one. But it must be remembered that even in the human race, each sex has organs which are rudimentary complementaries to the developed organs of the other sex. The breasts, the prostate gland in the male, and the clitoris in the female are examples of this. A fish is sometimes male on one side and female on the other. Male frogs sometimes contain well-developed ovaries. Geddes says, an organism may be said to be truly hermaphroditic when both male and female organs are present, or when, without there being separate organs, both male and female elements are produced. It is then both anatomically and physiologically hermaphroditic, and of this, as we shall see, there are abundant illustrations among the lower animals. Snail, earthworm, and leech are examples of this hermaphroditism, in varying degrees of intimacy. There are 2 theories regarding the origin of hermaphroditism. One view holding that hermaphroditism was the primitive condition, and that the unisexual or one-sex condition resulting therefrom by evolution. The second view being that unisexuality was the original condition, and that hermaphroditism evolved therefrom. Other authorities hold that both theories may be true, and that the original and the secondary conditions varied with different species. Geddes says, one view of the matter is that hermaphroditism was the primitive state among the multicellular animals, at least after the differentiation of the sex elements had been accomplished, and in alternating rhythms, eggs and sperms were produced. The organism was alternately male and female. Of this primitive hermaphroditism, there may be more or less of a recapitulation in the life history of the organism. Gegenbauer states the common opinion in the following cautious and terse words. The hermaphrodite stage is the lower, and the condition of distinct sexes has been derived from it. Unisexual differentiation, by the reduction of one kind of sexual apparatus, takes place at very different stages in the development of the organism, and often when the sexual organs have attained a very high degree of differentiation. The first structural stage in the separation would probably be the restriction of areas, in which the formation of two kinds of cells still went on at different times in one organism. In different individuals, the opposite tendencies we have already spoken of more and more predominated, till unisexuality evolved out of hermaphroditism. That environmental conditions are effective in changing the hermaphrodite into the unisexual stage is suggested by many experiments, and it has been shown in regard to some flowering plants, for example, the butcher's broom or the Ruscus aculeatus, that the monoecious or dioecious condition may be evoked by altering the nutritive conditions. Quite different is the view which regards hermaphroditism as a secondary condition derived from primitive unisexuality. Thus, Pelsnier maintains that the study of mollusca, Myzostomata, Crustacea, and Apisces shows that in these groups the separation of the sexes preceded hermaphroditism. Various cases in other groups tend to show that this is true universally, and the same conclusion applies to plants. In mollusca, Crustacea, and Apisces, at least, hermaphroditism is grafted upon the female sex. As an example of the results of perfect and normal hermaphroditism among the lower forms of life, the following instance of the method of fecundation among snails may be mentioned. It must be remembered that the snail has both male and female sexual organs, both perfectly developed, and both actively employed in the work of reproduction. The process is stated by Professor T.R. Jones, FRS of England, who says, the manner in which snails copulate is not a little curious, their union being accompanied by preparatory blandishments of a very extraordinary kind that to a spectator would seem rather like a combat between mortal foes than the tender advances of two lovers. After sundry caresses between the two parties, during which they exhibit an animation quite foreign to them at other times, one of the snails unfolds from the right side of its neck, where the generative orifice is situated, a wide sacculus, which, by becoming everted, displays a sharp dagger-like speculum or dart attached to its walls. Having bared this singular weapon, it endeavors, if possible, to strike it into some exposed part of the body of the other snail, who, on the other hand, uses every precaution to avoid the blow by speedily retreating into its shell. But at length, having received the sexual wound, the smitten snail prepares to retaliate, and in turn uses every effort to puncture its assailant in a similar manner. The darts are generally broken off in this encounter, and either fall to the ground or remain fixed in the wounds which they have inflicted. After these preparatory stimulations, the snails proceed to more effective advances, The sac of the dart is withdrawn into the body, and another sacculus is by a like process protruded from the common generative aperture. Upon this last named sacculus, two orifices are seen, one of which connects with the female generative system of the animal, while from the other a long whip-like filament, the male attachment, is gradually unfolded, being gradually everted, like the finger of a glove, until it attains the length of an inch or more. Then each of the two snails impregnates the other, and is itself impregnated at the same time. Even in hermaphroditism, however, the female element is the predominant, being more largely concerned with the reproductive and generative processes, while the male element apparently exists merely for the purpose of energizing or inciting into creative activity the female element. And as the scale is ascended, the male individual becomes specialized apparently for convenience in forming unions with female organisms removed in space from the original female. In the generative and reproductive, the mother element is the principal and predominant one. Chapter 4 will be Sex in Plant Life.